Reynolds murder case.
A second arrest has been made, and police say more charges could be coming. Early yesterday morning, officers arrested a female classmate, and today another arrest, another teenager.
Police say the body of the 16-year-old was burned and dismembered after she was killed.
In a quiet Illinois town took place a crime so horrifying that it shook the entire community in shock and disbelief. It was a typical day for a high schooler, with plans to attend classes and grab a bite with people she believed were her best friends. But life has a cruel way of revealing harsh truths through those we trust most. January 21, 2005, unfolded the tale of the horrors of Adrianne Lee Reynolds, whose body was found dismembered and stuffed in garbage bags.
Maybe she would have went to American Idol or one of them things, or at least tried anyway. Just hug your kids, because you never know.
Adrianne's father knew something was wrong the moment the 16-year-old was reported to be absent from her work shift at the Checkers restaurant. His concern quickly turned into panic when Adrianne was nowhere to be found. By the next day, he rushed to the police and officially reported her missing on January 22, 2005. As the search operation began, every second felt like a lifetime for the parents. Deep down, they knew something wasn't right. Adrianne had never gone this long without reaching out, not even during her rebellious teenage moments. This time it felt different, like she had disappeared off the face of the earth. As time went by, the investigators knew all too well that the first 24 hours were the most critical in any missing person case. 3 long days had passed, with officers interrogating anyone who had crossed paths with Adrianne or held any connection to her. The law enforcement officials eventually learned about an incident that had occurred in the parking lot of Taco Bell on the very same day Adrianne disappeared. This key detail was going to be the first crack in the mystery of Adrianne's disappearance. Some eyewitnesses informed the police that a fight among a group of teenagers took place in the parking lot that afternoon. Some questions were adding up, but their answers were nowhere to be found. Did the teens involved in the fight have any connection to Adrianne? Was she part of the fight? Or was that just another group of teenagers indulged in typical teenage behavior with no ties to her disappearance? Whatever it was the only lead giving officers hope of a breakthrough in Adrianne Reynolds' missing case. While interrogating the witnesses and discussing the messy details of the teen fight, 2 names began to pop up for the officers: Sarah Kolb and Corey Gregory. The interrogation officers soon contacted Sarah and Corey, who first wanted to determine whether the teens had any connection to Adrianne at all. Once it was confirmed that they knew Adrianne and were, in fact, her classmates, the authorities felt they were one step closer to finding her. The police quickly circled 3 teenagers who were said to be involved in the heated argument. The third was identified as Sarah's boyfriend. Each of them was called in and questioned separately, as the officers wanted to check for inconsistencies or overlaps in their stories. As per the incident narrated by Sarah's boyfriend, the trio, Sarah, Corey, and himself, went together in Sarah's car to pick Adrianne up with the invitation to a lunch date at Taco Bell. However, by the time the group reached the restaurant, a fight had erupted between the 2 girls in the back of the car. The boyfriend said the reason for the fight had been Sarah's anger at Adrianne for a remark she made about another boy. The heated discussion had fired up so much that the boyfriend decided to stay out of it and left the scene to avoid any involvement in the teenage love drama. But things took a dramatic turn as Sarah and Adrianne's words turned into actions, and they resorted to a physical fight. The story Sarah told the interrogating officers drastically changed the crucial details regarding Adrianne's presence that day. She didn't shy away from admitting the fight that had taken place. She accepted that she initiated it by punching Adrianne's face with high force. Adrianne didn't hold back and reciprocated Sarah's use of force by hitting her back. Things began to raise alarm bells in the minds of the officers when they heard entirely different versions of the same incident. It was now a case of 2 lies and a single truth. But one thing was confirmed: these teens were hiding something sinister. It's obvious because they were the only ones present where Adrianne was expected to be last seen. There were no witnesses who had reported to have seen her after this fight. 3 days after the tragic disappearance of Adrianne was reported, On January 24, 2005, it was Corey Gregory and his parents' turn to pay a visit to the police's interrogation room. Corey had an entirely different memory of the incident. In his version, they picked Adrianne up with the intention of letting her and Sarah work through their issues. This meant that the fight didn't begin in the car. The differences between Adrianne and Sarah had been brewing long before it finally turned physical that day. According to Corey, there was some tension and a bit of arguing, but it didn't last long as the girls made up with each other after lunch. He further added that later, they dropped Adrianne off at McDonald's as she requested. The investigators weren't buying Corey's story. Their suspicions grew, and with strategic questioning, they eventually broke him down. What Corey revealed next sent a silencing shockwave through the entire police department. The real accounts of what had happened were far darker than anyone could have anticipated. No one had thought that two teenagers could be capable of not just plotting, but carrying out such a deeply chilling act against Adrianne. Corey could no longer bear the weight of the crime he and Sarah had committed. The guilt finally broke him, and he revealed the details of the blood-soaked horror they had planned in their desperate attempt to hide Adrianne's body from the police. This revelation confirmed the cold, hard fact that Adrianne was no longer just a missing person. She had been dead for days. Corey started his confession with how exactly the lunch date had unfolded. Adrianne had hit Sarah in the face, which gave her an instant nosebleed. Shocked by the audacity of Adrianne, Sarah, in a rush of aggravated emotions, then reached out for the wooden stick that she had kept in her car for her safety. With anger burning in her eyes and no thought for the consequences, Sarah hit Adrianne with the stick and kept hitting her nonstop. But this wasn't the last blow that took Adrianne's life away. While wrestling and fighting in the back seat, Sarah forced her way on top of Adrianne, positioning herself in a way that Adrianne couldn't set herself free from Sarah's grip. She then grabbed Adrianne's throat to choke her. She kept pressing it and then used a belt to strangle until Adrianne stopped fighting back and fell unconscious. At that moment, Sarah and Corey were convinced that Adrianne had just passed out from lack of oxygen. The duo then grabbed some cigarettes, sat on the car's hood, and smoked away the physical exhaustion of their crime. This all happened in broad daylight during the peak time of lunch hour. The people nearby didn't get involved, thinking it was a typical teenager's fight. The gravity of the situation hit Sarah and Corey like a rock when they got back into the car and noticed Adrianne was in the same state, unconscious and motionless, as they had left her in the car. When they checked for signs of breathing, they realized that the choking grip of rage had killed her. What Corey and Sarah did next shocked even the most hardened investigators. The gruesome lengths they had gone to in order to make sure that Adrianne would never be found were insane. Corey continued his chilling account, revealing that he and Sarah then dragged the lifeless body of Adrianne out from the back seat to the trunk of the car. Aware of the seriousness of the situation, they knew they had no time to process the crime they had just committed. The duo quickly mapped out their next moves. Sarah decided that the best place to get rid of the body was at her grandparents' farm, located just outside East Moline. They drove to the farm with the intention of setting her body on fire. As per their twisted plan, they believed that burning would instantly turn Adrianne into ashes. But soon, the realization struck of how wrong they were. Once they arrived, they dragged the body out of the trunk onto the farmland and covered it with a tarp before pouring gasoline all over it. Corey then used a butane lighter to light it up. The current situation wasn't messed up enough for Sarah and Corey, who watched the fire burn while leaning their heads onto each other's shoulders as if enjoying a sunset on the beach. Human flesh and bones are not that easy to burn and get rid of. When Adrianne's body refused to burn as quickly as they had hoped, Sarah and Corey made some changes to their plan. The two couldn't think of a better solution than to chop her body parts and discard them individually. This unexpected escalation of the situation was too much for Corey, who found himself paralyzed by the horror of having to dismember the burned remains of a girl who had once been his best friend. That's when they decided to call up one of their fellow goth friend, who was very much fascinated by gore and blood. When Nathan Gaudet arrived at the scene, it was like a dream come true for him. Excited to act out on his disturbing fantasies of being involved in bloody situations, Nathan had no problem processing the gruesome task at hand. Without hesitation, he pulled out a saw he had borrowed from his grandfather, ready to carry out the cold-blooded act. Corey claimed he hadn't been involved in the killing, but he did confess to helping Sarah hide Adrianne's remains. After listening to this tale of blood-curdling mutilation, the officers wasted no time in retrieving the location of the site where Corey and Sarah had dumped her body parts. When the police arrived at Black Hawk State Park in Rock Island, they found some garbage bags near a manhole. Inside those bags were what remained of Adrianne. Only her sawed head and arms were found at this location. They had scattered the body parts in different locations. The rest of her, torso and legs, were discovered deep in the woods near Sarah's grandparents' farm. The teens later went to McDonald's to feast on a meal, as if the extremely insane day they had spent was nothing but a normal hangout with friends. Murders rarely happen without a clear motive. The question hung in the air: why did these teens commit such a haunting act of barbarism? Who was Adrianne, and how did she become friends with them? Adrianne had a strained bond with her biological mother. At the age of 16, she moved to Illinois to live with her adoptive father. Her adoptive parents described her as a spunky and full-of-life character. Drawn to the Gothic lifestyle, she surrounded herself with friends who shared a fascination for the darker side of life. She would often hang out with them to smoke. The trio, Sarah, Corey, and Adrianne, all had one thing in common. They struggled academically, which led them to cross paths at the outreach center. Sarah had the typical dominant personality of a popular schoolgirl. Corey's obsession with her was impossible to miss, as he followed her everywhere, making his love for her very obvious. Inspired by the 1990s horror-themed hip-hop band Insane Clown Posse, Sarah had embraced their rebellious Gothic juggalo lifestyle. She had multiple piercings, streaked hair, and an overall punk aesthetic. Described as angry, impulsive, and mean-spirited, she had a reputation for having a split personality disorder. She found pleasure in threatening others with graphic, violent phrases like, "I will slit your throat," or "I will cut you in pieces." Sarah was openly bisexual, and the people who felt the most intimidated by her were her girlfriends. She would become obsessively possessive about them and would feel jealous if they talked to others. Due to this, she would often be dealing with breakups. Corey Gregory was the next victim of her post-breakup terror. Aware of Corey's feelings for her, she took pleasure in the attention he provided, enjoying the chase and the power it gave her over him. Before drugs and alcohol got the better of him, Corey was a shy person who drastically changed into a violent person. It was Corey who introduced the two girls to each other. Sarah and Adrianne, feeling some chemistry between them, started exchanging letters about their bisexuality, which stirred up jealousy in Corey. Sarah wanted Corey and Adrianne to be both obsessed with her. She didn't like when they showed interest in anyone else. It was the December of 2004, when she had enough of Adrianne trying to take Corey away from her. In fact, she was also frustrated at Adrianne for romantically pursuing boys. Since then, things only got bitter between the two girls. Sarah would swear derogatory terms at her and scare her with death threats. Once, she called Adrianne to a hardcore juggalo crew party to test out her loyalty.
I don't know what's going on.
You just need to follow me, and we're gonna get you home right now. How's that sound? Or you can go
to walk?
Yes, you have to walk, or you go with the sheriff.
She set a trap by announcing that Adrianne was there to hook up. If Adrianne refused to get laid, she'd be seen as a loyal friend. But if she did hook up with someone, it would confirm Sarah's belief that she was a slut. In her paranoid mind, Adrianne had become a threat that had to be eliminated. Adrianne, confused by Sarah's sudden hostility, still tried to mend their broken friendship by writing her notes, making calls, and even talking to people in her inner circle. On the day of the incident, Sarah and Corey seemed to be finally over their issues. Adrianne, still hopeful of patching things up, was delighted when they came over to pick her up for lunch. It was Adrianne's comment about a boy that had again triggered Sarah's jealousy and possessive side.
Corey Gregory was 17 years old at the time he was given a 45-year sentence in the death of Adrianne Reynolds.
Sarah Kolb and Corey Gregory were arrested after the discovery of Adrianne's dismembered body and convicted of first-degree murder and concealment of a homicide.
Well, we are here at the Rock Island County Justice Center where that teen is in jail at this hour. The 17-year-old arrested at noontime today, now facing 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of concealing a homicide.
Sarah's first trial started on October 31, 2005, ended in a mistrial after the jury failed to reach a verdict on whether it was Corey who killed Adrianne, as Sarah claimed, or if Sarah was the one responsible for the murder, with Corey acting as her accomplice.
Kolb was sentenced to 53 years in prison. She has petitioned for a reduced sentence, but a judge has not yet made any decisions on that.
On her second trial in February 2006, she was sentenced to a total of 53 years in jail for the charges of murder and concealment. Meanwhile, Corey, who now identifies as Harley Quinn, was sentenced to 45 years in prison in July 2006.
We've learned that Corey Gregory is now known as Harley Quinn. She's in the process of a gender reaffirming transition.
You know, if I could give my life, I would. I'm sorry, I know it doesn't make a difference. I know you will never forgive me, and I would never ask for it because I do not deserve your forgiveness. And every single day, I wish I could bring her back. It never leaves me.
Nathan Gaudet, who wasn't involved in the killing of Adrianne but helped in chopping off her body, was awarded a juvenile sentence of only 5 years in prison. He was out after completing almost 4 years and met his fate by getting killed in a car crash in April 2012.
Quad City and forever tied to a notorious area crime has died. Police tell News 8 that Nate Gaudet has been killed in a fiery car crash in Indiana. He was just 16 years old.
2 decades later, both prisoners appealed for reduced sentences following the Illinois Supreme Court's 2019 ruling, which stated that sentences exceeding 40 years for juveniles were de facto, meaning a law that is specifically not counted as a law.
There's a difference, and I know the difference between a life sentence and 40 years. When you're inside, if you got a life sentence, it's called you don't have a time card.
Adrianne's family would have been devastated if the sentences were reduced. Both the convicts are currently serving their time in jail.
They were trying to get a lower sentence, so they reaffirmed the original sentence of 40 years for murder and 5 years for concealment of a body.